pleased to have at this table Tom Brooks, who's originally from Guilford, but he has dual citizenship in England and the United States. You are a professor of law and government at Durham University. We've been talking about that. And you are an author of Becoming British. So you're a guy from Guilford. You become British. How does this happen?
Well, it happens to some of us. So what I did effectively was, while I was pursuing my studies when I was a student, I got interested in looking a bit further afield for places to study. Became interested in some leading figures in areas of philosophy that I was studying at the time that were in the UK. And so went over originally just to study for a degree and come back to America. But it didn't work out like that. I wound up staying and really enjoying life overseas.
So you fell in love with the UK?
Yes, most definitely.
So first, and we can talk a little bit about this, you're an immigrant there. You first go to Ireland in 1999. Why do you settle there for a time?
Well, because for lots of reasons. One, that people in Ireland speak English.
And I can hear English, Irish, British.
There's a bit of influences of the different places that I've lived in. I'm a smorgasbord of lots of different things. But in Ireland, I was very interested in European philosophy. There were some leading people and a great program that was there in University College Dublin, where I studied. Went there only for a year just to see what it was like, and my intention was to come back. But I had a wonderful time. It was a beautiful place, and wound up staying for 2 years instead of 1, and then was encouraged to then move over to the UK, and haven't really looked back.
So you're at Durham University, which we were talking about Cambridge and Oxford, and that's arguably perhaps the third oldest, and they're really, really old. You head up the law school there. Something you always wanted to do?
Yeah, well, it was something that I had thought about when I was an undergraduate student. I thought about, well, maybe I'll go to law school. I was academically minded. I was thinking about having an academic career and thought that might be something I would do. But instead of doing that, I instead went off and studied philosophy and went down a different route, and in a sense came to law in a different way later on. It's something that I wish to some degree I had done a lot earlier, but very happy I got there in the end, and wouldn't have done it a different way.
We should say you are a member of the Labour Party in the UK. And let us talk about Brexit. There's another vote coming up in June. Help us, if you can, down the road, middle down the road, understand Brexit and what the ramifications are going to be in the UK.
A very good question. So in the United Kingdom, what typically happens is that the political parties contest an election, and they do it on the basis of manifestos. They make a series of pledges in a document that spell out what they will do if they come into office. And so everyone can see, in a sense, what the plan is. It's not a unique thing, it's something that they're required to do. With Brexit referendum, there wasn't a manifesto. There were different campaigns that were arguing for each side. And so there was a confusion of message, both for why the country should stay in the European Union and why it should leave. And the problem is that now that the country decided to leave, there's a confusion about what people were promised, what is part of that deal, what are we going to get next. And in a sense, we're still trying to figure out what that thing will be. And partly, this general election is meant to help solve that puzzle.
You are on record as saying they're never going to leave.
Yes.
You think they're going to leave, even after the second vote, but a softer leaving?
I think that what people were told leaving meant is definitely not going to happen. They were told there was going to be extra money in the National Healthcare Service. Instead of directing money to Europe, it was going to go to the healthcare service. The Prime Minister said that's not going to happen. They were told that there was going to be an end to freedom of movement from Europe into Britain as soon as Brexit happened. We now know that's not going to happen. There's going to continue throughout a transition period after Brexit happens. We were also told that there would be a points-based immigration system to help reduce folks coming into Britain, because immigration is a very big issue, hence something I have a particular interest in.
As an immigrant, you can talk about that.
Absolutely, and I have a particular personal interest in that. That's also something that the Prime Minister said is not going to happen. So key planks that people were told were going to happen from the official campaign aren't happening. I think that there will be some movement away from the European Union. It will no doubt be called Brexit, but there will not be a full break.
Now, what about France? This is getting very interesting in this country as well. We have our own situation in America where things are changing. We still have gridlock in our Congress, even though the Republicans control the Senate and the House and the White House. Lots going on in the world. Having dual citizenship, being an American and also a Brit, how are the Brits viewing what is going on in America?
Well, they look to America with some alarm.
And good luck answering that in a couple minutes.
Yeah, well, I'm going to try. They look to it with some alarm. It has to be said that the Tories, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, who are somewhere in the middle of the two to some degree, all three, during the presidential election that happened in America, all were very concerned about Donald Trump. That's just very clear. And when Trump won, you then found the British Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, and others all immediately backtracking and trying to fly as fast as they can to the White House to grovel and apologize for certain remarks. Our Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, former mayor of London, is known to have very colorful ways of describing political leaders of other countries, and he didn't hold back with some Americans. Where there was a bit of a love-in, right and left, with Obama. And I think that they're still having some difficulty trying to navigate what their feelings are.
There's so much to talk about. You know, now we're talking about China and we're talking about North Korea. How is Europe observing that right now? These are dangerous times, or do you see them as leaders just flexing their muscles?
Well, I think that's in the general European view is an awful lot of alarm, and I think what they worry about, and this is a kind of a stereotypical view about the United States, is, oh, there go those cowboys again, racing off and being very bravado and throwing weight around and acting before reflecting too much. They've often seen themselves as trying to be a moderating voice. That was certainly the position that Tony Blair thought he had to some degree with the White House previously. I think that they have a lot of worries about nuclear submarines being sent off the coasts of different places and trying to kind of provoke people into some type of action, because that's not what they want, because in Europe, the Second World War, the First World War, are very much in the back of people's mind. And that was actually why the European Union came to be. It was about stopping war. It wasn't necessarily about trade.
And not just about currency.
And definitely not about currency.
All right, becoming British. How does one become British when they are an American? How does that happen?
Well, it's harder than people think. So one of the things that really led me to look at this, I didn't plan on writing a book about immigration. I didn't plan on being particularly interested in immigration as a topic. It was simply going through the process. Immigration is the #1 issue of public concern in the United Kingdom. A lot of people are concerned about the numbers coming in and what that means for the future of the country. And there's a common perception that anyone can come in and that there's no regulations and so on. Yet, as someone who went through it, the regulations are enormous. There's over 2,000 pages of statutory regulations. That's before you get to case law about some of the rules, not all of the rules. And when people kind of really look behind, when I, in a sense, pull the curtain back, as I try to do in my book, to show what has to be done, it's really quite alarming what's being done in the name of becoming British.
You became a citizen in 2011. How hard was that? You had to fall in line with being a Brit,
yes,
right?
I did.
So what kind of hoops did you have to jump through?
Well, it's quite a few. So one standard one was that there were lots of visas I had to apply for, get, and namely pay for. That became increasingly more expensive over time. 20 years ago, some of these things didn't cost anything. Now, some of them will cost over £2,000 to get through. That was one kind of big hurdle. The other hurdle here is that to get permanent residency and become a citizen, you have to be clean. We're not talking only no criminal convictions, we're talking no parking tickets, no driving convictions of any kind.
Really?
Yes.
In the UK?
In the UK.
Okay.
And
you did well with that, did you?
I had to show I had a clean driving record, and I did. So that's one thing. But I think that the more curious, more difficult bit that really interests a lot of people back in my other home in the UK is the citizenship test that a lot of people have to pass in order to become British. In the United States, in contrast, the citizenship test is fairly simple. About 10 questions, you need to get 6 of 10 right, and there's stuff like, who was the first president, who won the Civil War, name one of the 2 longest rivers, a Native American tribe, and so on. Fairly standard stuff that a lot of people could do, even maybe if they weren't ever in America. The British citizenship test, it's a lot harder than that. How tall is the London Eye in feet? 443 feet to become British. Who set up the first curry house, and what was its name? This is talking about a guy in his restaurant that isn't there anymore and hasn't been there in decades. It's not like it's some kind of landmark you can find. These are kinds of things you find in the 180-page citizenship test for the UK. And that was hard.
It sounds like, and I've talked to some cabbies in London who say the test just to become a cabbie is enormous, that you must know a lot. You studied a lot. I mean, you are an educator, so you know how to do that. Did you pass the first time?
Well, yes, of course I passed. I mean, there was this enormous kind of concern that if I didn't pass, the shame of walking back afterwards and having to own up after telling people. But when I passed the test, I did what you do. I went on Facebook and said, "Hi everyone, I passed the citizenship test." And all my British friends said, "Congratulations on becoming British." And I said, "Well, how little do you know about becoming a British citizen? In the United States, you pass the citizenship test, fine. You've cleared that last hurdle towards taking the oath and becoming a citizen. In Britain, no. You've only got the last piece of paper you need to make an application to be a permanent resident, and then a year and 1 day later, you can then apply for citizenship. It's a lot more complicated. People don't understand not only what's on the test for being British, but they certainly don't know the many hurdles and trials and tribulations that people need to do for getting from A to B. They're often quite alarmed to hear what's being said in their name, and often the reaction I get from people on the right and the left is that, well, this isn't, while they want controls, while they think there should be some checks and restrictions and so on, not something like this, that this is not fair. This isn't a good representation of what people would expect from new citizens. It's a test for becoming a British citizen that no British citizen can pass.
Have you researched other countries? Is it harder?
Yes.
Is it the same? Is it different? What's it like in Italy or France to become citizens?
Well, not all
there?
countries have tests. Some countries on the continent will have, in a sense, you get citizenship through a very long residency or through having parentage. So in terms of citizenship tests, these things are becoming more widely used. Of all of those, I would say the British one is the most difficult. It is the biggest book. The Australian one is 40, 50 odd pages. The most difficult thing about the Australian test was a question about some cricket batsman and who had a sweet snap of the cricket bat and something. That's actually been removed and so on, because that was recognized as being a bit curious. But the British one really stands alone. I'll give you another example. 5 telephone numbers to memorize in the handbook. One of those is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Another, self-assessment on tax. The other 3, front desk of the House of Commons, the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly, so you can arrange a tour. And they forgot the Northern Irish Assembly in Stormont. So you've got omissions, you have mistakes, you have inconsistencies, not very well done, and that was some of the things that I picked up when I was studying it, asking British citizens, what do you think? What do you have to do?
Let's talk about immigration, because that just wowed me, all the things that you just said. You have to really want to be a citizen of that country.
Yeah.
How does the UK look at immigration, illegal immigrants, as opposed to this country? Do we differ a lot?
I think there's not that much difference in terms of a concern about a lot of people being illegal in the country, and a common perception that a lot of that people being illegal immigrants coming into the country is something happening at the border, that if only the wall was there, or thicker or bigger or deeper or other kinds of stuff, that would somehow solve the problem. Although actually the overwhelming majority of people who are in a country illegally are often enter it legally, but overstay a tourist visa, overstay some other type of visa. And actually, if you want to crack down on these things, it's after people are in the country. I think that type of anxiety is probably the same, although I think that the welcoming spirit, if it can be called that, is probably at the moment less in Britain than it is over here. There has been more engagement in the United States, in part because of this recognition of the country as a place founded by immigrants, for immigrants, and to some degree troubled history at times in dealing with our historical past. Whereas in Britain, it's a very different place. It's an island. It sees itself as separate from other things. It sees others as, in a sense, attempted invaders, and really tries to have a distinctiveness about itself versus others. And so it is a bit more, I don't want to say xenophobic, but I want to say a bit more oversensitive.
Are the British as proper as we expect and think that they are? And speaking from an American and as a Brit, could we learn some of their manners that they still have?
Well, I think that these things go both ways. I think it would be great if more people in the UK said things like, "Have a nice day," even if they don't really mean it. I think that would be nice. I think that opening up doors and so on is something that I experience a lot more when I come to the United States than I do in the UK. On the other side, I think what strikes me most about the UK is not so much that people are friendly, although I think that people are very friendly over there, but I think that there is less of a, well, more of a communal spirit, more of a sense of solidarity, very badly put, that you'll find, more of a sense of community. In an island where people are just, you can talk to someone, you can not only know what region they might come from, but you can also start to nail down what city people are from, or what kinds of areas, because there is this kind of strong ties that people have to certain places. And yes, it does sometimes express itself in terms of football, soccer club allegiances, which is also another curious phenomenon.
That you had to learn.
Which I've also had to learn.
What do you want people to take from this book?
Well, there's at least two things I think that should be taken away from the book. One is just simply a recognition about how the myths, in a sense, the common perceptions about how immigration works are very, very different from the reality. And I think that this is, in a sense, a test case about how these things are working in Britain, but I think that a lot of the things that I've found with the UK could be found elsewhere. I think the second thing that I would want to really have kind of taken away from the book is this thought that many countries want new members to integrate, to become part of their communities, to take on their values and their spirit and so on, whatever those values and spirit might be. But this recognition that integration is not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. And a lot of the policies and procedures that people construct in order to build security and borders and so on. These things can be very good at kind of pushing people away, but they're not very good at integrating people in. So one of the things I found in my research is that things like the way that the test has worked and other parts of the immigration rules meant to help ensure that new citizens were really kind of taking on British values and the British way of life, actually were leaving people very bitter. Instead of integrating people, it was actually disintegrating things, actually pulling them apart, and that's something that we all need to be very wary about.
All right, so a professor of law and government, you're on the telly a lot.
That's what we call it.
Yes. Might we see you running for office someday over there? Do you have the heart to do that? I
don't know if I've got the heart. Not at this moment in time. Not at this moment in time. It's not something I'm planning for right now.
That's not a no.
Well, I've realized, I mean, when I was a student, originally working, studying music and philosophy, I never thought I'd be head of a law school. I'm very wary not to rule anything out.
Right. And I'm wondering how the Brits would take to somebody who was from America running for an office there.
Well, Boris Johnson was elected mayor of London. He was born in New York City, spent the first couple of years of his life, of course, spent the overwhelming rest of it somewhere else. But, you know, there are some precedents of people coming over in the House of Commons, House of Lords. So, you know, it wouldn't be the first, I wouldn't be a trailblazer.
Well, we'll have to see what you do. I have to say, when I watch members of Parliament talking over each other, it's a very grand event. Much different from our country. I'm sure you've witnessed that many times.
Yeah, and I quite like it. I think that there can be, I mean, it's not always the case, but there can be a bit of a give and take. Yes, on the one hand, there is an awful lot of theater that is a bit empty to some degree. There are occasions where people are just kind of reading out speeches without really listening to each other so much, that you find in every legislature to some degree. But other times you have some really interesting exchanges of people being able to kind of interject and so on, and a real give and take that I think is unique to Britain, and a wonderful virtue of how the democracy works.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for coming on and kind of giving us an idea of what it is to have one foot over here and one foot on the other side of the pond. Thank you very much. The book is Becoming British. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Spend all night kissing and the ball's right here, then who else is missing? Got a little sidetracked if I'm so wishing I could find the keys to the door, but it's also a metaphor. Things keep locked in the grocery store, but mine just to save time. I'll skip right ahead to the last ride.